I'm First Lieutenant Aileen Floyd, 32 years old, an officer in the United States Army. And tonight, on leave, I'm sitting at a dinner table in Buckhead, Atlanta, watching my brother, Preston, laugh in my face. "That's a good one, little sister," he says when I mention buying a house. "You just focus on following orders. Leave the big strategic moves to the people who actually understand them." My mother just nods, and my father is lost in his dry brisket, beaming because Preston just bragged about a big deal. A deal he has no idea is aimed at crushing my own company. They don't know that my big strategic move is already in motion. And the first target is the $5.2 million mansion Preston was just bragging about. If you've ever been underestimated, treated like the other in your own family, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe, because this is the story of how a soldier took back control. I sat in the silence of my rented sedan, staring at the perfect colonial-style house. It was bathed in the soft, golden light of a Georgia evening, a monument of old money and new arrogance nestled in the heart of Buckhead. The lawn was so meticulously manicured, it put the parade grounds at Fort Benning to shame. Every blade of grass stood at attention. I took a deep, steadying breath, the kind I take before a mission briefing, and smoothed down the front of my blazer. This was my civilian armor: a sharp navy blazer, a silk shell top, tailored trousers, everything immaculate, wrinkle-free, and utterly devoid of personality. This wasn't a family reunion. It was an infiltration. I stepped out of the car and the heavy, humid Atlanta air wrapped around me like a weighted blanket. Inside, the chill was of a different sort. My mother, Eleanor, was in the foyer, not to greet me, but to orchestrate the movements of a hired housekeeper. She glanced up, her eyes doing a quick, critical scan of my appearance. "Good, you're here," she said, her voice crisp and dismissive. "Go on and set the table, Aileen." There was no hug. No. "How was your flight?" Just an order, delivered with the casual authority of someone who had never once considered I might refuse. From the dining room, I could hear my father, Arthur, holding court about his brisket. He'd been smoking it for 12 hours, a fact he'd announced to me via text message that morning. I could already smell it, the scent of dry, overcooked beef, a testament to his enthusiasm overpowering his technique. The entire house felt heavy, thick with the unspoken air of judgment. I walked toward the dining room, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the polished hardwood floors. I was on enemy territory. The dining room wasn't a place for family meals. It was a museum dedicated to the glorification of my older brother. The grand, mahogany-paneled wall above the fireplace served as his personal shrine. There was Preston, grinning in a bespoke suit on a mock-up cover of Forbes. There he was again, shaking hands with a U.S. senator on the deck of a yacht, the picture of effortless influence. Another photo captured him accepting some meaningless financial award, his smile practiced and smug. My eyes scanned the curated collection of his triumphs, searching for any sign that another child lived here. And then I saw it. Tucked behind a large porcelain vase overflowing with blue hydrangeas, almost completely obscured, was a small standard 4x6 photo. It was me, in my crisp dress uniform, on the day I graduated from West Point. My face was serious, filled with a pride and purpose that felt a million miles away from this room. I was an afterthought, a footnote hidden behind the floral arrangements. Just then, the front door opened and Preston swept in, a full 30 minutes late, as always. "Sorry, everyone, merger talks ran long," he announced to the room at large. He loosened his Hermes tie, the knot perfect even in its undone state. My parents descended upon him instantly, fussing and cooing as if a king had just returned to his court. My mother took his suit jacket, my father clapped him on the shoulder, and just like that, the universe of the Floyd family realigned itself around its true center. The dinner officially began, and of course, the main topic of conversation was Preston. "I'm looking at a mansion over on West Paces," Preston announced nonchalantly, swirling a ridiculously expensive Cabernet in his glass, a bottle he'd brought, making a great show of presenting it to my father. $5.2 million. Needs a little work, but the property is incredible. My parents' eyes lit up as if he'd just announced a cure for cancer. "Oh, Preston, that's wonderful," my mother gushed. The right address is so important. She then turned to me, the gesture feeling like a mere formality, a box to be checked. And what about you, Aileen? Still, playing with your little computer projects on your off hours? Her tone was the one you'd use for a child proudly displaying a macaroni necklace. It was laced with a patronizing sweetness that was far more insulting than outright scorn. I kept my voice even, refusing to let the sting show. Actually, I said, placing my napkin on my lap, I'm looking into buying a house myself. Preston let out a sharp bark of laughter. It wasn't a chuckle, it was a noise of pure, unadulterated contempt that cut through the clinking of silverware. That's a good one, little sister, he sneered, taking a sip of his wine. With what? A first lieutenant's salary? That's adorable. Really? My father, sensing a flicker of tension, decided to intervene. Not to defend me, but to gently guide me back into the small, manageable box they'd built for me. Aileen, just focus on your military career, he said, his voice a placating rumble. Stability is a fine thing. It's good to have a steady government job. He said, job as if I were a clerk at the DMV. But the killing blow, as always, came from Preston. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table, the picture of condescending wisdom. You just focus on following orders, little sister, he said, his voice dropping into a mock-serious tone. Leave the big strategic moves to the people who actually understand them. My mother nodded in solemn agreement, and then, to add insult to catastrophic injury, he continued, his voice full of the self-satisfied excitement of a predator describing a kill. Speaking of which, the firm is pouring capital into a new tech disruptor, Apex Innovations. The goal is to move fast, hit the market hard, and crush all the small, independent players before they even know what's happening. My blood ran cold. He had just, with chilling precision, described the exact strategy being deployed against my own company, the one I had secretly founded and built from nothing. The company that was my life's work, the one they thought was a little computer project. My knuckles were white around the handle of my fork. The metal pressed painfully into my skin. I didn't say a word. I simply stood up, my chair making a quiet scraping sound against the floor. 3 pairs of surprised eyes turned to me. I drove away from that house, the dry taste of my father's brisket still in my mouth. A quiet fury was building inside me, solidifying from a hot, messy emotion into something cold, hard, and sharp. Crush all the small players, his voice echoed in my head. I pulled out my phone, my movements precise and deliberate. It rang twice. Thornton, a familiar voice answered. Reese, I said, my own voice steady and devoid of emotion. Preston wants the house on West Paces. There was a pause on the other end. I'm acquiring that target. The rain began to fall as I drove away from Buckhead, thick, heavy drops that smeared the city lights into long, blurry streaks across the windshield. The rhythmic thump-thump of the wiper blades was like a metronome, counting out a beat to the memory reel playing in my head. Crush all the small, independent players. Preston's words echoed in the enclosed space of the car, not with the arrogant boom he'd used at the dinner table, but with a chilling familiarity. He'd always been good at crushing things, especially if they were mine. The sound of the rain faded, replaced by the noisy chatter of a high school gymnasium. I was 15 years old again, standing under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the annual science fair. For 3 straight weeks, I had barely slept, fueled by cheap coffee and a burning desire to create something real. My project was a simple door security system, coded from scratch on a clunky second-hand laptop I'd bought with money saved from mowing lawns all summer. It was the most valuable thing I owned. The code was elegant, the circuitry was clean, and when I flipped the switch, it worked. Perfectly. A wave of pride, so pure and potent, had washed over me. This, I thought, this was it. This was the thing that would finally make my father, a former executive, look at me and see not just a quiet, nerdy daughter, but potential. Then Preston arrived. He was a freshman in college then, home for the weekend, and he'd brought his entourage, a pack of loud, entitled frat boys, all wearing polo shirts with popped collars and smelling of cheap beer. They swaggered through the aisles of carefully constructed projects, their laughter echoing off the gymnasium walls. "Hey, check it out! It's the Floyd family genius," Preston bellowed, pointing a thumb at my booth. His friends snickered. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I tried to shrink behind my trifold presentation board. "What's this supposed to be, Aileen?" he asked, leaning over my display with a smirk. "Trying to catch burglars?" One of his friends, a big guy named Chad, nudged my table with his hip, making my laptop wobble. "Does it actually work, or is it all, theoretical?" I tried to explain the algorithm, the way the sensor detected motion and triggered a silent alarm to a designated phone number. My voice was small, barely audible over the noise of the gym. I could see the glazed-over look in their eyes. They weren't listening. They were waiting for the punchline. They just wanted a show. And Preston, ever the showman, was about to deliver. He picked up the can of Coke he'd been carrying, gesturing with it as he spoke. "See, the thing is," he said, taking a dramatic step closer, "real security is all about." He let the sentence hang in the air as he tripped over his own feet. It was a clumsy, theatrical stumble, a move so fake it was insulting. The can of Coke left his hand, arcing through the air in a perfect, horrifying trajectory. It landed with a sickening splash right on the keyboard of my laptop. There was a sharp hiss, a fizzing sound as the sugary liquid flooded the sensitive electronics. A puff of smoke, smelling of burnt plastic and caramel, drifted upwards. The screen flickered once, then went black. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, months of saving, a universe of hope, all extinguished in an instant. Preston's friends roared with laughter. He just shrugged, a picture of feigned innocence. "Whoops, clumsy me," he said, not even bothering to look at the dead machine. He didn't look at me, either. "Anyway, it's just a school project, right?" The feeling of absolute helplessness that washed over me in that moment. The suffocating weight of public humiliation. I never forgot it. It was a cold, hard stone that settled deep in my gut and stayed there for years. I packed up my ruined project in silence, the jeers of my brother and his friends following me out of the gym. That night, I tried to explain what happened, the words tumbling out between sobs. My mother, Eleanor, just sighed, a long, weary sound of inconvenience. "Aileen, don't be so dramatic. You know how boys are. He was just being playful." My father's response was even worse. He looked at me not with sympathy, but with disappointment. "You should have backed up your data." "That's the first lesson in business, Aileen." Besides, he added, delivering the final, crushing blow, "you need to learn to take a joke. Don't be so sensitive." No one apologized. No one made Preston pay for the laptop he'd destroyed. They blamed me for being bullied. They criticized my reaction to the cruelty, not the cruelty itself. That was the moment I understood. In that perfect house with my perfect family, I was utterly and completely alone. It wasn't just a single act of carelessness, it was a system. A system designed to protect the golden boy and manage the scapegoat. If you've ever had a moment where you felt completely invisible in your own family, a moment where your feelings were dismissed as being too sensitive, please support this story with a like. And in the comments, just type a single word, invisible. Let's see how many of us have stood in that same lonely place. That night, crying in my room, I made a promise to myself. I would never again depend on their approval. I would never again be so fragile. I would build my own world, a fortress so strong that no one, especially not my brother, could ever kick it down again. The memory of the ruined laptop and the sting of my father's words finally faded as I pulled into the parking garage of my apartment building in Midtown Atlanta. The echo of that long-ago humiliation dissolved into the present moment. Up in my apartment, the air shifted. This place was the complete antithesis of my parents' Buckhead mansion. It wasn't large or opulent. It was small, functional, and ruthlessly efficient. There were no family photos on the walls, no shrines to anyone's success. Instead, the main wall of my living area was dominated by a massive whiteboard, a chaotic tapestry of complex security algorithms and projected revenue streams. This was my real home, my command center. I walked into the small kitchen, the exhaustion of the evening settling deep into my bones. I brewed a cup of black coffee, the bitter aroma cutting through the lingering sweetness of my mother's cloying disapproval. Back at my workstation, I powered on my laptop. Not the flimsy second-hand machine of my youth, but a hardened, military-grade beast of a computer. Its processing power a quiet promise of capability. I never let anyone else touch my tools again. Taped to the corner of the monitor was a yellowed sticky note, a quote I had transcribed on my first day at West Point. It had followed me from my barracks to Bagram and back. It is not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. Teddy Roosevelt's words were more than an inspiration. They were an operational directive. This small apartment was my arena. This was my sanctuary. The place where, line by painstaking line, I built Aegis solutions from nothing. My mother's little computer hobby wasn't born in a cozy basement. It was forged in the dust and chaos of Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan. My nights there weren't spent at officers' clubs. They were spent huddled in the back of a freezing shipping container, a Conex box, the deafening roar of C-130s taking off just yards away, rattling the metal walls. With numb fingers, I'd type code for hours, building the foundational architecture of Aegis on a ruggedized laptop. The green glow of the screen, a small circle of light in the oppressive dark. My days were for the Army. My nights were for Aegis. I used my meager first lieutenant's salary, money my family assumed I was spending on uniforms and pizza, to pay for server space. I took my first potential client calls at 3 a.m, whispering into a satellite phone, hoping the connection would hold just long enough to secure a contract. All the while, my family imagined me playing soldier, living a simple, structured life, following orders like a good girl. They had no concept of the empire I was building in the shadows of their ignorance, an empire financed by my exhaustion and built on a foundation of their underestimation. The irony was a bitter pill I'd swallowed long ago. I remember the day I got my acceptance letter from Georgia Tech, a full scholarship for their renowned engineering program. It felt like my future was finally beginning. I showed it to my father, my hands trembling with excitement. He'd glanced at it, his expression unreadable, before setting it down on the kitchen counter. "You need discipline, Aileen," he'd said, his voice laced with that familiar tone of paternal authority. "West Point will forge you into something stronger." A few months later, I overheard him on the phone with Preston, his voice brimming with a pride he never showed me. "We're going to liquidate some of the blue chips," he'd said. "We need to make sure we have enough liquid capital to cover your Harvard MBA. That is the future of this family." So I packed my bags for the U.S. Military Academy. I traded my dream of designing circuits at Georgia Tech for the rigid discipline of the long gray line, hoping, naively, that this sacrifice would finally earn their respect. And now, more than a decade later, after all the deployments, the commendations, the quiet successes, they still saw me as a child playing with computers. I clenched my hand into a fist, the phantom pain of that long-ago choice tightening in my chest. They hadn't just underestimated me, they had actively diverted the resources for my dream to finance my brother's. The real turning point, the moment Aegis went from a dream to a viable reality, came during Christmas 2 years ago. My family was in Aspen, a trip entirely funded by Preston, who made sure everyone knew it. They were sending me photos of snow-capped mountains and expensive ski lodges. I'd told them I had to be on duty, a convenient lie they readily accepted. The truth was, I'd drained my entire savings account for a last-minute flight to Austin, Texas. I wasn't there for the music or the barbecue. I was there for a massive cybersecurity conference, a long shot in a sea of tech giants and venture capitalists. I stayed in a cheap motel off the highway that smelled of stale smoke and desperation. For 3 days, I lived on protein bars and the free coffee from the convention center. I networked relentlessly, handing out the simple business cards I'd printed myself, fighting for a moment of anyone's time. I finally got it. 5 minutes in a crowded, noisy breakout room to demo my prototype to a small group of angel investors. I was nervous, exhausted, and running on fumes. But when I spoke about my technology, the passion took over. I explained the architecture, the unique encryption method, the potential for scalability. One man stayed behind after the others had left. He was older, with sharp, intelligent eyes that saw past my simple blazer and nervous energy. He saw the code. He saw the potential. He asked 3 brutally tough questions, and when I answered them without hesitation, he handed me his card. He became my first investor. His check wasn't just money, it was validation. It was the first brick laid in the foundation of the citadel I was building. And I had laid it all by myself. It was 1 in the morning. Back in my apartment, the adrenaline from the drive had faded, leaving behind a familiar, weary exhaustion. I stood before the whiteboard, staring at the complex architecture of my company, the very entity my brother had just unknowingly declared war on. I felt the familiar weight of fighting alone pressing down on me. But this time was different. I wasn't 15 anymore. I picked up my phone and dialed the only number in my contacts saved under a rank instead of a name. "Are you up, Sergeant?" I asked, my voice low. On the other end, I heard a slight rustle of sheets, then the immediate shift from sleep-fogged silence to crisp focus. "Always, ma'am," Reese Thornton replied. There was no complaint, no question of why I was calling at such an hour. Just readiness. "I need a sitrep. Meet me at the office." 5 minutes, he said, and the line went dead. This was the family I had chosen. A family forged not by blood and manipulation, but by mutual respect and proven competence. As my car cut through the deserted streets of Midtown, the Aegis Solutions headquarters came into view, its glass and steel facade glowing against the dark sky. This wasn't a hobby, it was a fortress. And I wasn't going to let my brother tear it down. The office was less like a tech startup and more like a CIA command center. Access required a thumbprint scan, which opened sliding glass doors into a space dominated by a wall of monitors. They displayed a constant, silent stream of global cybersecurity data, threat assessments, network vulnerabilities, and asset protection protocols. Reese was already there, standing by the coffee machine as promised, 2 steaming black coffees in hand. He was a former Army sergeant who had served under my command, and now he was the Chief Operating Officer of Aegis Solutions. He was the only person on Earth who knew the full story. He handed me a mug. "Situation report, Lieutenant," he said, his tone a familiar mix of military formality and dry humor. I took a sip of the strong coffee, the warmth a welcome contrast to the chill that had settled in me hours ago. My eyes drifted to the glowing charts on the wall. They showed a 300% growth curve over the last fiscal year. Last year's revenue, $35 million. My little computer project was doing just fine. I gave him the battlefield assessment, recounting the dinner in flat, emotionless detail. The condescending remarks, Preston's mansion, the final chilling mention of Apex Innovations. Reese listened without interruption, his expression hardening. He didn't laugh or offer empty reassurances, he just tightened his grip on his coffee mug, his knuckles turning white. "Your family," he said finally, his voice a low growl. "They're blind, ma'am. Willfully blind." He shook his head, taking a slow breath. "It reminds me of that NATO exercise in Germany. You remember that?" I nodded. It was years ago, but the memory was sharp. The Red Team hackers launched a simulated cyber attack that took down the entire power grid for the base. Chaos. We had full bird colonels running around yelling, unplugging things, literally shouting at the monitors. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "And you, just a brand new first lieutenant, you calmly walked up to the command console." This old colonel, a guy with 30 years in, was just frozen, staring at the screen. You put a hand on his shoulder, gently moved him aside, and sat down. He paused, his eyes fixed on me, remembering. "Your fingers just flew across the keyboard. It was like watching a concert pianist. You weren't panicked, you weren't even sweating. In under 10 minutes, you had isolated the breach, purged the malware, and rebooted the entire grid. The lights came back on, and the whole command tent just stared at you." He looked me straight in the eye, and for the first time that night, I felt something other than anger and hurt. I felt seen. You pushed a full bird colonel out of his own chair, ma'am, Reese said, a slow smile spreading across his face. You didn't ask permission. You just took command because you were the most competent person in the room. That's when I knew you were the real deal. I told myself that day I'd follow you anywhere. That was it. That unwavering respect, that unconditional faith in my abilities, born from seeing me in action, not from a shared last name. It was the one thing I had craved my entire life, and I had never once gotten it from my own family in Buckhead. Here, in this office at nearly 2 a.m, with an army sergeant who saw me for exactly who I was, I finally felt home. The exhaustion and the hurt began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. All right, Reese said, his voice snapping back to business as he turned to the main monitor. He brought up a schematic of our current projects, his fingers moving deftly across the keyboard. They want a war. We'll give them a war. He looked over his shoulder at me, his expression all loyalty and resolve. What are your orders, Lieutenant? So it's not just talk, I said, my voice flat. Reese and I were huddled over the main console in the Aegis Command Center, the glow of the screens illuminating the stark determination on our faces. The warmth of our brief moment of solidarity was already being chilled by the harsh realities of the situation. Reese tapped a key, bringing up a freshly published article from the Atlanta Business Chronicle on the central monitor. The headline was stark and confident, written in the bold, declarative font of a business press release. Preston Floyd's venture firm leads $20 million investment round in Apex Innovations. I read the first paragraph, then the second. It was all there: the aggressive market strategy, the targeted demographics, the explicit goal of capturing market share from smaller, specialized firms. My firms. Reese pointed to a line item in their published strategy. They're not just a competitor anymore, ma'am. They're a well-funded threat. They'll use that cash to undercut our pricing and poach our clients. He paused, his expression grim. They already tried to headhunt 2 of our junior engineers last week, offered them double their salaries. This was worse than I thought. This wasn't just Preston's casual arrogance at the dinner table. This was a calculated, strategic assault. He was actively, deliberately trying to crush me. A cold knot of anger tightened in my stomach. Just as I was about to give Reese my first counteroffensive order, my phone buzzed on the console. The caller ID flashed a name that made me want to hurl the device against the wall. Eleanor Floyd. I let out a long, slow sigh. Reese saw the name and gave me a sympathetic look. I waved a hand, signaling it was fine, and pressed the speakerphone button. Maybe, a tiny naive part of my brain thought, maybe she's calling to apologize. Aileen, darling, Eleanor's voice cooed through the speaker. It was a honey-sweet tone, a carefully crafted instrument of Southern passive aggression she only deployed when she wanted something. I've been thinking so much about dinner the other night. I waited, my silence a wall. And I think, she continued, her voice dripping with faux sincerity, that you should call Preston and make things right. The words hung in the air of the command center, so absurd, so profoundly unjust, that for a moment I couldn't process them. I saw Reese physically turn his back to the console, his shoulders tense, a gesture of respect to give me the illusion of privacy while he tried to conceal his own outrage. Make things right, I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. Yes, honey, she said, as if explaining something to a child. You know your brother. He's under a tremendous amount of pressure with all his success. And when you brought up buying a house like that, well, it came across as a little provocative, don't you think? It made him uncomfortable. I felt the blood drain from my face. Provocative. My quiet statement of a personal goal was provocative. She was rewriting history in real time, painting me as the aggressor, the agitator in a situation where I had been openly mocked and belittled. You should apologize for creating all that tension, she went on, her tone now one of gentle, maternal guidance. He loves you, you know that. He just wants what's best for you. Love? He had just called me a failure in front of our parents, and now he was using a $20 million war chest to methodically dismantle everything I had ever built. This was their definition of love. a blanket to smother me with while they celebrated my brother's predatory success. I was supposed to apologize for having the audacity to exist outside of the tiny box they had assigned me. I took a breath, forcing my voice to remain level. "Mother," I said, the word feeling foreign and strange on my tongue. "Did you hear what Preston said about my work? Did you hear him call it insignificant?" There was a long, exasperated sigh on the other end of the line. "Oh, Aileen, don't be so sensitive. You know how he is. He was just teasing you." She dismissed the deepest insult of my professional life as a harmless joke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a complete and utter refusal to see. She was incapable of it, or worse, unwilling. "Anyway," she said, her voice brightening, abruptly changing the subject as if the matter was settled. "Are you planning on attending the Piedmont Driving Club's charity gala on Friday? Preston is the keynote speaker, you know. It would look so good for you to be there, supporting your brother. It's a wonderful opportunity for you to network with successful people." She didn't get it. She would never get it. I was a soldier on a battlefield my brother had created, and my own mother was suggesting I attend his victory parade. She wanted me to stand in a crowd of Atlanta's elite and applaud the man who was actively trying to destroy me. That was the final piece of confirmation I needed. You can't reason with a person who refuses to acknowledge reality. You can only change it. I pressed the red icon on the screen, ending the call. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the quiet hum of the servers lining the wall. The sound of my real life, my real work. The empire they refused to see. After I ended the call with my mother, I stood perfectly still. For 10 full seconds, I didn't move, didn't breathe, letting the silence of the command center wash over me. It was a profound quiet, broken only by the low, steady hum of the server racks lining the wall, a sound that, to me, was the rhythmic breathing of my creation, my life's work, the sound of my real life. Reese stayed silent, watching me from across the room. He didn't offer platitudes or ask if I was okay. He knew this look. He'd seen it on my face in the moments before a mission launch in some dusty, forgotten corner of the world. That unnerving calm that settles just before the storm breaks. It was the absolute certainty that comes after the final piece of intelligence clicks into place. In that silence, something fundamental inside me shifted, a tectonic plate of long-buried pain and resentment grinding into a new position. The hurt, the lifelong sting of being the afterthought, the quiet ache of being unseen. It didn't just fade, it cauterized. The raw, open wound of their disapproval was seared shut by the white-hot fury of my mother's final, ultimate betrayal. What was left wasn't fragile or wounded. It wasn't sad. It was cold, hard, and clear. It was steel. "She wanted me to apologize," I said. My voice wasn't emotional. It was a simple statement of fact, a piece of battlefield intelligence, but it cut through the silence like a razor. Reese simply nodded, his eyes locked on mine, waiting. He understood the gravity of that statement. It wasn't just a request, it was an attempt to erase my reality. "So, what are we going to do, Lieutenant?" he asked, his voice steady. He wasn't asking for a discussion or a therapy session. He was asking for his orders. That question solidified everything. I turned and walked with measured steps to the massive whiteboard that covered the far wall. It was a chaotic masterpiece of my own design, a complex web of security algorithms, data flow charts, and projected revenue streams. It was the blueprint of my silent success. I picked up a black dry erase marker, uncapped it with a decisive click, and with a series of long, sweeping strokes, I wiped it all clean. The work of months, the intricate plans for defense and growth erased in seconds. The slate was now blank. The silence in the room was now absolute, filled with the weight of unspoken potential. In the stark, empty space, I wrote 2 words in bold, block letters, pressing the marker so hard it squeaked against the board: Operation Cinder. An operation not of defense, but of total annihilation. From the ashes, something new would be built. "Reese," I said, turning back to him, my voice now carrying a new timbre. It was crisp, authoritative, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of command. "Target package number 1. Contact our real estate acquisitions agent, Now. Reese was already at his terminal, his fingers poised over the keyboard. Standing by, ma'am. The property at 4500 West Paces Ferry, the one my brother was bragging about. Reese's fingers flew and the Zillow listing for a sprawling, opulent mansion appeared on a side monitor. I want to make an all-cash offer, $200,000 above the current asking price. Use the pre-established shell corporation, Northside Holdings. I want 0 contingencies, a 7-day close, and I want the keys in my hand in 48 hours. Make it happen. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Reese's face. It was the look of a soldier who had been waiting for the order to go on the offensive. Yes, ma'am, he said, the admiration clear and sharp in his voice. Shock and awe. That's the objective. I pointed the marker at the board again, my movements economical and precise. Next, I continued, my tone leaving no room for debate. Target package number 2. Apex Innovations. I drew a box below the operation title and began listing sub-targets. I want a full-spectrum analysis. I want their complete supply chain mapped, from hardware vendors to their cloud service providers. I want personality profiles on their key engineers and executives, their ambitions, their frustrations, their pressure points. I want their entire client list, their server architecture, and a full penetration test to identify every single digital vulnerability they have. I want to know what brand of coffee their CEO drinks in the morning. Preston wants to fight a strategic battle in the world of business. He's about to find out what a real strategic battle looks like. My eyes flickered to the small yellowed sticky note on my monitor, to Teddy Roosevelt's words that had been my mantra for so long. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena. For years, I had interpreted that as a call to endure, to keep my head down and keep fighting my quiet battles in the dust and sweat, invisible to the critics in the stands. But I saw it differently now. The quote wasn't about enduring punishment, it was about fighting to win. The man in the arena doesn't just bleed, the man in the arena wins. The time for quiet endurance, for absorbing their blows and hoping they would one day see my worth, was over. It was time to claim the victory. Reese nodded once, a sharp, affirmative gesture. He didn't ask why. He didn't question the aggression or the speed. He was a soldier, and he had been given a clear and actionable set of orders. He turned to a separate workstation and began typing furiously. The clicks of the keys like the sound of a weapon being loaded. The machine was in motion. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering lights of the Atlanta skyline. Somewhere out there, in the wealthy, insulated enclave of Buckhead, my brother was probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of his brilliant new venture. My parents were probably toasting his success, reinforcing the family narrative of the golden son and the difficult daughter. They were all so sure of their places in the world, so confident in the roles they had assigned me. Preston told me I should focus on following orders, I said quietly, more to myself than to Reese. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass. No longer a hurt daughter trying to earn approval, but a commanding officer on the eve of a major offensive. He's about to find out what my orders are. The war had been declared at a dinner table, without my consent, but it would be fought on my terms, on my battlefield, using my weapons, and this time, I wasn't hiding my firepower. This is the moment everything changes. It's the moment you stop defending and start attacking. If you've ever reached that point in your own life, that enough is enough moment, hit the like button as a salute to that strength. And in the comments, type 2 words that say it all. No more. Let's see who is ready for the fight. 48 hours later, Operation Cinder's first objective was secured. I stood with Reese in the grand, marble-floored foyer of the mansion on West Paces Ferry Road. The space was cavernous and empty, our footsteps echoing off the soaring ceilings and bare walls. Sunlight streamed through the massive Palladian windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. The previous owners had already moved out, leaving behind only the scent of lemon polish and the profound silence of a home waiting for a new life. Transaction is complete, Reese said, his voice professional but carrying an undercurrent of satisfaction. He dropped a heavy set of keys into my waiting palm. The metal felt cold and solid, a tangible symbol of my victory. All cash, routed through the Northside Holdings Shell Company. Clean, fast, and completely anonymous. They never knew what hit them. I walked through the echoing rooms, my boots clicking on the marble and hardwood. Reese followed a few paces behind. We weren't admiring the architectural details or imagining where furniture would go. We were assessing the terrain. Good sight lines from the upper balcony, Reese noted, pointing towards the sweeping view of the infinity pool and the dense forest beyond. Clear field of fire. We can secure the perimeter with a new gate system and motion sensors. I nodded, looking at the layout not as a homeowner, but as a strategist. The main entrance is a potential bottleneck. We'll need to establish secondary egress points. The service corridors are well placed. This wasn't just a house to me, it was a strategic asset. A beachhead established deep in enemy territory. It's not just a house, Reese, I said aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the vast space. It's a message. Understood, ma'am, he replied. Which brings us to phase 2. He paced the cavernous living room, his eyes scanning the space, assessing its tactical possibilities. The housewarming party, or, more accurately, the reveal operation. A slow smile touched my lips for the first time in days. Exactly. An ambush, hidden in plain sight. I turned to face him, my mind already running through the logistics. The guest list will be critical. I want everyone there. Atlanta's business press, our key partners from Aegis, every major tech player in the city, and... I paused for effect. The entire Floyd family. Reese's smile widened. I like it. How do we ensure they attend? The invitations will be sent from the new mysterious owners of 4500 West Paces. We'll make it the most exclusive, talked-about event of the season. For my parents in Preston, the combination of high society and intense curiosity will be irresistible. They'll walk right into the trap because their egos won't allow them to miss it. A few days later, I had to make one last trip to the Buckhead house. There were some old service records and personal documents I needed from my childhood bedroom. I timed my arrival for midday, assuming everyone would be out. But as I was quietly packing a box in my old room, I heard Preston's voice erupt from my father's study downstairs. It wasn't his usual smooth, confident tone. It was a choked, furious roar. What do you mean, it's sold? He yelled into his phone. It was on the market for 3 weeks. I was putting together the financing. There was a pause, then his voice climbed even higher. To a shell company? I don't care how much they offered. Find out who they are. Don't you know who I am? I wanted that house. I stood just outside the study door, hidden in the hallway's shadow, listening to the impotent rage of the golden boy who had just been outplayed. For the first time in his life, something he wanted had been taken from him, and he had no idea who to blame. I expected to feel a surge of triumph, a rush of vindictive pleasure. Instead, I felt nothing. Just a profound, quiet calm. The cold, satisfying click of a well-executed plan falling into place. I picked up my box of papers, walked silently out the front door, and drove away without looking back. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place 2 days later. My phone rang, and it was my mother, her voice a flurry of social indignation. Aileen, can you believe the nerve of some people? Someone swooped in and snatched that gorgeous house right out from under Preston. So rude. The gossip is all over Buckhead. She barely paused for breath before her tone shifted to excitement. But listen to this. Did you get the invitation? To the mystery party? At that very house. It's the talk of the town. Your father and I are going, of course. Preston too. You should come, Aileen. It's time you started networking with successful people. You could learn a thing or two from your brother. I leaned back in my chair at the Aegis office, a genuine smile playing on my lips. The trap was set. The bait was taken, and the target was walking in of his own free will, with my mother holding the door open for him. That's a great idea, Mom, I said, my voice smooth as silk. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'll be there, definitely. The night of the party, the mansion on West Paces Ferry was no longer a silent, empty space. It was alive, blazing with light and buzzing with the collective hum of Atlanta's elite. Caterers moved with silent efficiency through the crowds, carrying trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music a tasteful backdrop to the conversations of CEOs, politicians, and local celebrities. From a vantage point on the second-floor mezzanine, hidden in the shadows, I watched them all arrive. I was no longer wearing my humble civilian armor. Tonight, I was wearing a floor-length evening gown of deep crimson silk. It was a color of power, of defiance, of blood. It was a declaration. Then they arrived. My family. They entered the grand foyer as if they owned the place. My father, Arthur, looked regal in his tuxedo. My mother, Eleanor, was elegant in navy blue, her head held high, scanning the crowd for important faces. And between them, the crown prince himself, Preston. He was in his element, shaking hands, clapping backs, his laughter booming with the effortless confidence of a man who believed the world was built for his pleasure. They moved through the party, a tight unit of privilege, observing the house with a mixture of admiration and possessive envy. "Someone certainly has more money than sense," I heard my father remark to a city councilman, gesturing vaguely at the Italian marble. Eleanor leaned in to whisper to Preston, though her voice carried in a lull in the conversation. "This should have been yours, darling. It really should have." Preston just shrugged, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Don't worry, Mother. It's just some new money fool with a big ego. They always overpay." He took a flute of champagne from a passing tray and moved deeper into the crowd, completely at home in a house he thought he'd lost to a stranger. I watched them for another 20 minutes, a silent observer at my own party. They mingled, they networked, completely oblivious. My mother pointed out the integrated smart home and security system, controlled by a series of sleek, wall-mounted touchscreens. I had overseen the installation myself. Reese had programmed the interface. "Oh, look at that," Eleanor said with a condescending little laugh to the wife of a banking executive. "It looks just like those little gadgets Aileen is always tinkering with in her apartment. This is probably the professional version, of course. Much more expensive." Preston, who had circled back to them, didn't even glance at the screen. He rolled his eyes. "Please, Mother, let's not talk about her little hobby projects here. It's embarrassing." That was it. The final insult. Delivered in my own home, about my own work, by the two people who should have been my biggest champions. From my perch in the shadows, I gave Reese a subtle nod. The time had come. He moved to the small raised dais where the string quartet had been playing. They finished their piece and quietly exited as Reese stepped up to the microphone. The low hum of conversation began to quiet as people turned their attention to him. "Good evening, everyone." Reese's voice was calm and clear, carrying easily through the grand space. "On behalf of your host, thank you all for coming tonight." Our host would like to say a few words. A single powerful spotlight flared to life, illuminating the top of the grand, curved staircase where I now stood. The crimson of my dress was a slash of vibrant color against the cool white marble. I saw hundreds of faces turn and look up at me, their expressions shifting from curiosity to confusion. But I wasn't looking at them. My eyes were fixed on only 3 people. I saw my father, Arthur, freeze mid-conversation, his face slackening with disbelief. I saw my mother, Eleanor, her polite socialite smile dissolving as her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that was just beginning to dawn on her. And I saw Preston. He was holding a fresh glass of champagne. His arm stopped halfway to his lips. The smug, confident mask he wore fell away, replaced by a raw, naked shock. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers. It seemed to fall in slow motion, hitting the marble floor with a sharp, explosive crack that echoed through the now dead, silent room. I descended the staircase, each step deliberate and measured. I walked to the dais, took the microphone from Reese, and turned to face my audience, my family. My voice, when I spoke, was perfectly calm. It was amplified, clear, and carried not a single tremor of fear or hesitation. "Welcome, everyone," I began, my gaze sweeping the room before landing squarely on my parents. My family has always worried that my little computer hobby, as they call it, would never amount to a real future. I let the words hang in the air, then I turned my head, my eyes locking directly with Preston's. He was still frozen, a shard of his broken glass near his expensive Italian shoes. My brother, in fact, recently gave me some sound advice. He suggested I should leave the big strategic moves to the people who actually understand them. A small, cold smile touched my lips. And so I am especially happy that they could all be here tonight to witness my latest strategic move. I raised my free hand, gesturing to the magnificent house around us, to the life they never saw, the success they never believed in. Welcome to my home. The party ended in a stunned, chaotic silence. My family didn't rage or scream. They simply vanished. They slipped out a side door amid the flurry of confused whispers and shocked glances from the other guests, disappearing into the Atlanta night like ghosts. In the 3 months that followed, my phone became a vessel for my mother's escalating desperation. It started with angry texts, then devolved into pleading voicemails filled with dramatic sobs and accusations. I deleted them all without listening. The war for recognition was over. Now began the war of attrition. While my family was reeling, Aegis Solutions was executing the final phase of Operation Cinder. We didn't need a sledgehammer, we used a scalpel. We launched a major software update that rendered Apex's flagship product obsolete overnight. Reese, with surgical precision, negotiated the acquisition of a small, obscure firm in Silicon Valley that happened to own a key patent essential to Apex's next-generation technology. We didn't enforce it, we just sat on it, cutting off their future. Then, we made a quiet, irresistible offer to Apex's lead engineer, a brilliant woman Preston had poached from a competitor. We offered her not just more money, but a budget, a team, and the freedom to innovate. Things my brother, in his arrogance, had never bothered to provide. It was a precise and brutal corporate dismantling. Last Friday, Apex Innovations filed for Chapter 11, bankruptcy. The financial press, which had once lauded Preston as a visionary, now called him a reckless amateur, a case study in hubris and poor judgment. His star had fallen as quickly as it had risen. They came on a Sunday afternoon. I saw their car pull up the long driveway from my home office window. They didn't come as guests invited to a party, they came as supplicants seeking an audience. I had the staff show them to the formal living room, the same room where they had mingled with contempt just 3 months earlier. I made them wait for 10 minutes before I entered. They were sitting together on one of my expensive Italian sofas, looking small and out of place amidst the airy, modern decor. My mother was weeping silently into a handkerchief. My father, Arthur, who had always carried himself with such unshakable pride, looked like a defeated old man, his shoulders slumped, his face etched with a weary despair. Preston sat between them, his face ashen, his eyes hollow. He stared at the floor, a ghost in a bespoke suit. "Aileen," my mother began, her voice thick with tears, "you have to help your brother. You have to save him. He's lost everything." My father looked up at me, his eyes pleading for the first time in my life. We co-signed the loans for his initial investment, Aileen. We put up our retirement savings as collateral. His voice broke. "We're going to lose the house." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the unspoken weight of their ruin. It was Preston who finally broke it, though he still couldn't bring himself to look at me. "You don't understand," he mumbled, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It was a complex tech deal, highly volatile. You got lucky." Lucky. After all the years of silent work, the nights in Afghanistan, the sacrifice of my own dreams, he still couldn't see it. He still thought my success was an accident and his failure was a complex misfortune. I walked closer, standing directly in front of him, forcing him to finally lift his head and meet my gaze. "The company was called Apex Innovations," I said, my voice cold and clear as ice. "And it went bankrupt because my $35 million hobby project systematically acquired its core infrastructure, its intellectual property, and its top talent." I let the words sink in, watching the dawning horror in his eyes. "You declared war on me, Preston. You did it with our parents' life savings, and you lost. A strangled gasp escaped my mother's lips. My father simply stared, his mouth agape. The full scope of the situation, the terrible, ironic truth of it, finally crashed down upon them. They hadn't just been blind. They had actively funded their own son's assault on their daughter. It was Eleanor who found her voice first, a piercing shriek of disbelief and fury. "But we're family! How could you do this to your own brother?" That was the final lie I could not let stand. I turned away from them, walked across the marble floor to the grand front doors, and pulled them open, letting the bright afternoon sunlight flood the foyer. "No," I said, my voice resonating with a lifetime of unspoken truth. "This isn't what a family does. A family doesn't belittle and undermine. A family doesn't try to crush one of its own to elevate another." I looked at them one last time, not as my mother, my father, and my brother, but as three strangers sitting in my house. You were never my family. I held their stunned, broken gazes for a long moment. "Get out of my house." They stumbled to their feet and walked past me in a fog of shock and grief. I didn't watch them get into their car. I just stood there until I heard the sound of their engine fade into the distance. Then, with a quiet final click, I closed the door, shutting them out of my life forever. The war, the one that had been raging since I was a child, was finally over. 3 months later. I was sitting on the terrace of my mansion on a quiet Sunday morning. The air was soft and warm, carrying the sweet scent of Georgia pine and blooming magnolias. There were no more dinner table battles to prepare for, no more strategic assaults to plan. There was just the gentle clink of my spoon against my coffee cup and the peaceful expanse of the blue sky above. The house no longer felt like a trophy of war. It felt like a sanctuary, a place of profound and hard-won peace. Spread out on the table in front of me weren't battle plans or threat assessments. They were the architectural blueprints and curriculum outlines for the Aegis Veterans Program. It was a $5 million fund I had established, a personal commitment to recruit, train, and employ transitioning service members, giving them a clear path to a new career in the tech industry. For so long, my work had been about building defenses, about creating impenetrable walls. Now, it was about building bridges. I was creating my own chosen family, my own garrison of allies, on a much larger scale. This was the true dividend of my victory. As I was reviewing a proposal for a new training module, my phone, lying face up on the table, began to vibrate. The name on the screen was Eleanor. A year ago, that name would have sent a jolt of anxiety or a surge of anger through me. 6 months ago, it would have been a trigger for cold determination. But now, as I looked at it, I felt nothing. My heart rate didn't quicken. My hands didn't tremble. There was no anger, no satisfaction, not even the ghost of a wound. There was only a quiet, hollow emptiness. It was like looking at an artifact from another life, a relic from a war that had ended so long ago its battles had faded from memory. The name on the screen belonged to a stranger. My first instinct, born of years of conflict, was to decline the call, to make a statement. But a statement was no longer necessary. The war was over. There was no one left to fight. I simply reached over, pressed the volume button on the side of the phone until the screen flashed silent, and then turned it face down on the table. It continued to vibrate, a silent, impotent tremor against the dark wood, but the sound of its demand was gone. I had not engaged. I had not fought back. I had simply rendered it irrelevant. They no longer had access to my emotions. They no longer had a place in my world. The battle was, finally and truly, over. A few moments later, Reese walked out onto the terrace, carrying 2 fresh mugs of coffee. He placed one in front of me, his movements easy and familiar. We had found a new rhythm in peacetime, the rigid formalities of our military pass softening into the comfortable rapport of partners. "Ready for the 9 o'clock briefing, Lieutenant?" he asked, a familiar, teasing glint in his eye. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. My gaze drifted to the old, yellowed sticky note still taped to the corner of my laptop, which sat on the table beside the blueprints. "It is not the critic who counts." Teddy Roosevelt's words had been my shield and my sword for so long. They had carried me through the arena, through the dust and the sweat and the blood. I had fought my battles, faced my critics, and I had won. But I finally understood the quote's true meaning. The credit was in the fight, but the prize? The prize was the peace you found when you could finally leave the arena behind. Just Aileen is fine, Reese, I said, my voice soft. Call me Aileen. He smiled back. All right, Aileen. Let's get to work. I picked up my mug, the warm ceramic a comforting weight in my hands. I took a sip of coffee and looked out at the Atlanta skyline, the morning sun glinting off the distant skyscrapers. For my entire life, I had been fighting for a seat at their table, for a single word of recognition from a family that was incapable of giving it. Now, sitting here, in this quiet moment of my own creation, I finally realized the truth. The only approval that ever really mattered was my own. And freedom. Freedom tasted so much sweeter than revenge. My war is over, but I know that for many of you listening, you might still be in your own arena, fighting your own battles. My story is a testament to the fact that peace is possible, that you can build your own sanctuary, and that your value is determined by you and you alone. This channel is our space for these stories, a place where we share journeys not just about the fights we've endured, but about the strength we've found and the peace we can build afterward. If my story has given you a measure of hope, please like this video to help it reach others who need to hear it. Subscribe and join our garrison of allies, and in the comments, I'd be honored if you would share one word that describes what freedom means to you. Thank you for listening.